Chapter 10-11 Mantra. Spirit Guardian felt Zhang Yi's undisguised murderous intent. She knew that Zhang Yi was not joking. If she could not give Zhang Yi a satisfactory answer today, Zhang Yi would definitely kill her. After a moment of silence, she said, "Chaos, I just saved your life." Zhang Yi narrowed his eyes and asked word by word, "Do you really think I need you to save me?" Spirit Guardian's expression also became less certain. The reason she had just appeared was because she judged that Zhang Yi would not be able to block a combined attack from the three of them. However, soon afterwards, Zhang Yi displayed power that exceeded her imagination. Could it be that Zhang Yi still had a way to save herself at that moment? Zhang Yi slowly took out White Eagle and Holy Judgment. "You've been by my side, and I think you've already reported everything I've said to Zhu Zheng. So even if I kill you, Zhu Zheng won't have any grounds to blame me. He was the one who played tricks on me first." Spirit Guardian was deterred by Zhang Yi's intense murderous intent and subconsciously took a few steps back. "Wait. I haven't had time to report to headquarters yet." Zhang Yi tilted his head and looked at her, and Flower already cocked his tail, slowly blocking her retreat. As long as Spirit Guardian didn't understand the explanation, Zhang Yi would act decisively. Even if he didn't kill Spirit Guardian, he had to make her suffer enough to show Zhu Zheng his attitude. Spirit Guardian hurriedly explained, "During this time, I have been hiding in your shadow. I haven't had the opportunity to pass on any information to headquarters. As a mutant with space abilities, you should understand this. The signal from Star Island was never stable, let alone transmitting messages from an independent dimensional space." Zhang Yi's mouth curled into a cold smile. "Why should I believe you?" Spirit Guardian said in an indifferent tone, "I'm telling the truth. If you don't believe me, you can check my communication system." "How do I know if you haven't secretly deleted the communication records?" Zhang Yi held a sword in his hand, cautiously staring at Spirit Guardian and maintaining a state where he could strike at any time. "Unless you let me give you a shot." Give a shot?" Spirit Guardian was shocked. Then she saw Zhang Yi take out a blue vial. The truth serum worked best when injected directly. Once injected with this stuff, even the strongest warrior's psychological defenses would collapse. Spirit Guardian of course knew what it was. Her face changed slightly. "No, I absolutely will not allow you to do this to me." Zhang Yi snorted coldly, "Ha, I'm afraid it's not up to you anymore. To be honest, I don't trust you at all. If you really want to fall out with me, you can try and see what the consequences will be." He spread his arms wide and said viciously, "If Zhu Zheng really has any sinister plans for me, then the worst that will happen is that we will both be destroyed. If the Jiangnan region lost him, it would completely fall to second place on Star Island and lose all qualification to compete with the Allied forces. Zhang Yi would not accept betrayal, no matter what the reason." Spirit Guardian was really getting a little anxious at this point. As a temporarily promoted captain, her strength was not outstanding, and fighting a top-notch strong like Zhang Yi would definitely be killed in seconds. Even her most skilled space ability was being suppressed by Zhang Yi. "Chaos, I can let the commander talk to you." Zhang Yi shook his head. "I don't trust you." "You think I'll trust Zhu Zheng? Don't try anything with me. You choose whether or not to take this bullet." Spirit Guardian was surrounded by the murderous intent of Zhang Yi and Flower, and she couldn't move an inch. When she chose to appear from the shadows, she was destined to become the fish on the chopping board. "Can I consult with headquarters?" She was still making a last-ditch attempt. "No." Zhang Yi had no intention of playing Tai Chi with the old man Zhu Zheng. He was already a good sport for putting up with it until now. This was all thanks to Spirit Guardian for choosing to stand up and help him fight at the critical moment. Spirit Guardian quietly clenched her fists. Finally, with no other choice, she lowered her head and nodded slowly. Zhang Yi immediately told Flower to rush forward and take complete control of her. The corners of Flower's mouth turned up, revealing a strange smile. The huge man stood upright, and he actually held Spirit Guardian in his arms like a doll. Zhang Yi walked over and made her reveal the flesh of her neck, and then he stuck in a needle. Knowing too much, you will regret it. So, you'd better not ask irrelevant topics. Spirit Guardian said through his black blindfold, staring at him intently. Zhang Yi raised an eyebrow. Oh? Interesting, very interesting. It seems that you still have a lot of secrets hidden away. Zhang Yi did not linger long, to avoid another attack from the mutants of the Allied forces. But on second thought, this was not really a big problem. Because so far, he had killed 3 members of the Hell's Lock, which was close to half of them. He still had Flower Take's Spirit Guardian with him, and they made their way to the ruins dozens of miles away. Then they would slowly interrogate Spirit Guardian. Spirit Guardian did not hold out for long and lost her will. There was no way to cheat this kind of subcutaneous injection, so it could be confirmed that she would answer any question. Combining it with her previous inexplicable words, Zhang Yi felt that he could get a lot of useful information from her. In particular, the story of what happened in Blizzard City during the 5 months he was away from Jiangnan University. He took out a chair, sat down in front of Spirit Guardian, and crossed his legs. Zhang Yi thought for a moment, then reached out and removed her black eye patch. When he saw her eyes, Zhang Yi couldn't help but freeze for a moment. Those eyes were large and ethereal, with ice-blue pupils. Zhang Yi always felt that those eyes looked familiar, as if he had seen them somewhere before. Vaguely, he remembered a certain old friend. He asked word by word, "Tell me, where are you from?" Spirit Guardian's eyes were vacant as he slowly spoke. "My name is Mu Yan, I'm from Moshan District, Jiangning City." Spirit Guardian's self-introduction was a bit long, and Zhang Yi listened patiently. This was not a chance to obtain captain-level intelligence very often. Soon, Spirit Guardian introduced his background. And the main point came at this time. After the end of the world, I and some friends I met along the way struggled to survive in Jiangning District. Because I awakened my supernatural powers, I was able to barely maintain my existence. 4 months ago, the army of Blizzard City found me and took me back. They conducted human experiments on me and implanted a special type of cell in my body. This allowed my strength to increase rapidly. And I was not the only mutant who had cells implanted. There was a large group of mutants from the outer city who were brought back to Blizzard City with me. We all underwent the same human implantation experiment. Later, I learned unintentionally that that special type of cell originated from a common parent. Her name is Yuan Kongyue. Chapter 10-12 Zhu Zheng's Plan. The appearance of the 3 words Yuan Kongyue caused Zhang Yi's pupils to shrink slightly. Unexpectedly, after so long, he once again heard this familiar name. Tianhai City, the leader of the Snow Worship sect. The most dangerous enemy Zhang Yi had ever encountered in his life, and also the first Epsilon-class mutant he had ever encountered. Although a long time had passed, Zhang Yi still could not forget the difficulty of that battle. At that time, they had gathered the entire power of Tianhai City, plus everyone from the Black Robe Squad except for Bian Junwu. In the end, it was only with the help of the trigger Zhang Yi had planted that they were able to kill him with difficulty. I see. I understand. I see, Zhang Yi muttered to himself, his eyes filled with reminiscence and emotion. He remembered that Yuan Kongyue had given them all ice crystals. The major powers in Tianhai City, including Zhang Yi, had used up the ice crystals in their possession. However, the Black Robe Squad had retained one. If there were no accidents, it must have entered the Scientific Research Department of the Jiangnan District headquarters. Have they cloned the ice spirit? Zhang Yi frowned. If Yuan Kongyue could be cloned, that would undoubtedly be an extremely terrifying thing. This meant that Epsilon-class mutants could be mass-replicated. However, Zhang Yi looked at Spirit Guardian again and dismissed the idea. The cloning technology in 2051 was not yet able to reach that terrifying level. Otherwise, Spirit Guardian would not be so weak. It was probably around 9,300. He stared at Spirit Guardian and said indifferently, "Tell me everything you know about Yuan Kongyue's clone cells." Spirit Guardian told him everything she knew. However, she didn't know everything about the entire scientific research project. She only knew that after Zhang Yi left Jiangnan University, Blizzard City suddenly began to gather a large number of talented mutants from the outer cities. Then, they began to conduct large-scale experiments on them to adapt the ice spirit. And the probability of failure in these experiments was very high. In other words, the cloning technology actually had major flaws, so the ice spirit was not perfect. But when it came down to it, Spirit Guardian's words made Zhang Yi feel a sense of alarm. The entire Night Raven squad is the most successful group of mutants to have undergone transplants and clones. But we know of one being that is close to perfection, obtained through complete cloning. And the reason for the existence of the Night Raven squad is to make her flawless. Her name is Cornell. It is said that she is a mutant with no upper limit and can continue to grow forever. One day, all of us in the Night Raven squad will perish, thus becoming her nutrients. This is also the origin of my codename Spirit Guardian. Carrying stones to fill the sea, selflessly transforming into nourishment for others, and ultimately forging a powerful divine status. Zhang Yi's gaze grew colder and colder. By the time he said this, he already knew everything that had happened during those 5 months. No wonder Zhu Zheng's attitude towards him had suddenly become somewhat cold. No wonder Blizzard City had begun to see a large number of refugees from the outer cities, as well as a large number of mutants. The ethereal girl named Yuan Kongyue had reappeared in the world in another way. But this time, she didn't have to go to great lengths to plunder other people's origin. She had obtained the energy of the entire Jiangnan region at the highest level. Zhu Jing wanted to cultivate Epsilon, someone completely under his control. I see. Zhang Yi made no comment on this matter. How Zhu Jing cultivated his subordinates was his problem. But he should never, ever have thought of Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi pinched Jinglei's chin with one hand, forcing her to look up at him. Then he asked coldly, "What was Zhu Zheng's purpose in having you follow me?" Spirit Guardian replied, "First, to protect you. To be precise, to help you. He thinks you are acting too impulsively on your own, and asked me to help you if necessary." There was nothing wrong with that. No matter what Zhu Zheng's intentions were, Zhang Yi was still one of the most valuable combat forces in the Jiangnan region. He could transfer his favoritism to Zhu Yu, but he could not give up Zhang Yi. Zhang Yi snorted, "What else?" Spirit Guardian said, "To monitor you, especially to see if you have the ability to seize the source of God. If necessary, to prevent you from monopolizing the source of God." According to Commander Zhu's thinking, he plans to give some of the source of God to that perfect clone to use. Zhang Yi frowned slightly after hearing this. He didn't feel any anger. Wasn't this how it was supposed to be between people? People could come together for the common good, but they could also have conflicts due to conflicting interests. Anyway, he didn't really have any expectations of Zhu Zheng. Naturally, he wouldn't feel betrayed and angry because of Zhu Zheng's selfishness. Children talk about right and wrong, but adults only weigh the pros and cons. To borrow a line from a classic movie or TV show, if you can't kill me with one shot and I come back to life, we can still do business, as long as the price is right. In Zhang Yi's eyes, Zhu Zheng was just a collaborator, and there was no loyalty to speak of. However, the fact that Zhu Zheng had asked Spirit Guardian to spy on him. He would definitely make a big deal about it when he got back. At the very least, he would make Zhu Zheng cut a big chunk of his profits in order to make it up to him. As for that perfect clone of Yuan Kongyue, Zhu Yu. Zhang Yi thought about it. If calculated according to time, if he ended his trip to Star Island and returned to Jiangnan District, I'm afraid that by then, she would already be Epsilon, or close to Epsilon's level. A clone is not the same as the original. As long as they don't share a common memory, they can't be considered the same person. She shouldn't come looking for revenge on me. And even if she comes looking for me, I'm not afraid. Zhang Yi was confident. By the time he returned to Jiangnan, he would definitely have become Epsilon. Zhu Jing was not stupid either, and would not let the two of them fight. Zhang Yi reached out and removed the communication device from her body, then threw it into his own dimensional space. Flower's huge eyes kept staring at her. "Master, why don't you let me eat her?" "No, Zhu Zheng and I have not yet completely broken up. Killing her will do me no good." Zhang Yi simply refused. "But bringing her along is a burden." Flower tilted her head and looked at Zhang Yi. "Her goal is the source of God. There is a possibility that she will do something against you at a critical moment." Zhang Yi shook his head and said indifferently, "That won't happen." Flower's big eyes twinkled, and then she said with a smile, "You're right. Let her take a good look at her master's strength, and then report back to that old guy Zhu Zheng. Just in case he overestimates his abilities and does something stupid." Chapter 1013, A Monstrous Achievement. After killing the 3 people Amaterasu, Susanoo, and Medusa, Zhang Yi knew in his heart that the battle for Star Island was nearing its end. There were not many surviving captain-level figures on the island, and most of them had already arrived at the Source Island's core area, the Misty Valley. Then, the opponents they would encounter next would also become increasingly powerful. This hardy hunt would also become even more exciting and thrilling. He was not in a hurry in his heart. Unless he encountered a mutant of Epsilon class, no one below Epsilon could threaten his life. Even if Zhang Yi had someone he couldn't defeat, he would definitely not be defeated, and at most it would be a 50-50 split. He adjusted the communication channel a bit and did not choose to directly contact the command center. Instead, he contacted Situ Xian, the deputy head of the operations department. After receiving Zhang Yi's communication, Situ Xian hurriedly came over and asked in a low voice, "Captain Chaos, is there anything you want to communicate?" Zhang Yi simply said calmly, "I killed 3 mutants, Neon's Amaterasu, Susanoo, and Columbia's Medusa." Minister Situ Xian froze in place. His expression was frozen, and he didn't come back to his senses for a long time. Zhang Yi said, "Hello? Minister Situ, are you still there?" Minister Situ Xian came back to his senses and quickly nodded. "Oh, I'm here." "I'm sorry, Captain Chaos. What did you say? Could you repeat it?" At this point, he seriously doubted whether there was something wrong with his ears. Chaos had said that he had killed 3 high-level mutants from the Allied forces. In their intelligence system, these 3 were all first-class experts. They were second only to super beings like Billy the Kid. Zhang Yi managed to kill 3 of them at the same time? Even though Situ Xian and Zhang Yi were both from Jiangnan, he felt like he was hearing something from another world. Killing 1 person and killing 3 people were 2 completely different concepts. Zhang Yi laughed helplessly. "I said, I killed 3 mutants." He had to repeat what he had just said. Situ Xian was shocked beyond words, and he finally confirmed that he had not heard it in his dreams. Because soon, Zhang Yi, in order to convince him, directly sent him photos of the bodies of Christina and the Sea Tide Girl. As for the great god Hongwan, because it was completely swallowed up by the void, it only gave Situ Xian a glimpse of his somewhat tattered sword of the Tachi clan, Kunamitsu Nagamune. This time, Situ Xian no longer had any doubts. He was so shocked that he trembled with excitement. He knew that Zhang Yi was very strong, and he had never underestimated Zhang Yi's strength. But today, he had to admit that he had still underestimated Zhang Yi. Who said that the Jiangnan region's chaos only had strong defenses? His offensive capabilities were just as sharp. He had achieved a complete victory against 3 opponents, and with this kind of strength, he was probably close to Epsilon. "I hope you recorded my battle record, because I'm going to redeem my reward afterwards." Zhang Yi smiled. Okay, I will." "Chaos, you have truly accomplished an unprecedented feat this time." Situ Xian's smile nearly reached the back of his ears. Suddenly, an impulse welled up within him, telling Zhang Yi to come back and not continue adventuring on Star Island. A mutant with such strength was definitely the most precious treasure in the Jiangnan region. From the very beginning, the Jiangnan region had not had high expectations for capturing the source of God. Zhang Yi had killed so many mutants that their trip to Star Island could be considered a triumph. However, he could not make the decision on his own, and had to report to Zhu Zheng. Zhang Yi ended the transmission and then left with Spirit Guardian. Flower ran deep into the ruins and dug Lele out of the ground where he was hiding. There was no other way. Lele's combat effectiveness was too weak. When it came to actual combat, he could only hide. In the command center, that is, inside the body of the black tortoise. Situ Xian was so excited that he could hardly control his expression. Such an abnormal situation surprised the officers in the East Sea region. Because officers of Situ Xian's rank were expected to hide their emotions. But he was so excited that he was trembling and the smile on the corner of his mouth was hard to hide. There was no doubt that he had encountered something that made him extremely happy. One officer asked, "Minister Situ, what happened that made you so happy?" Situ Xian walked over with a smile on his face. He glanced at Li Tianyang and the other officers from the East Sea region and said proudly, "Nothing special. It's just that Captain Chaos from our region contacted me and said that he's killed a few more mutants from the Allied forces." Li Tianyang couldn't help but twitch the corner of his mouth. Chaos, he'd done it again. He snorted lightly, "Chaos is really something. Tell me, which team of mutants did he kill? Was it Neon's mutants or Scylla's? It couldn't have been another member of the Hell's Chain, could it?" Situ Xian laughed, "Ministerly, if it was just an ordinary mutant, it wouldn't be worth mentioning." He lowered his head, and when he slowly raised it, his gaze contained a deep meaning. It seemed to mock Li Tianyang, but also contained an element of bragging. "Let me be honest with you, he didn't kill many mutants this time. Only 3. These 3 are Neon's Amaterasu, Susanoo, and Medusa from the Underworld chain. Directorly, do you think this battle record is acceptable?" Situ Xian stared at Li Tianyang and the others in the command center with a smile on his face. Soon, he saw the reaction he wanted. Everyone in the command center was frozen, their faces full of shock and disbelief. They all stared with wide eyes and open mouths, subconsciously wanting to say, "Impossible. Absolutely impossible." But this came from Situ Xian's mouth, and he could not be joking about such a thing. But who would have believed that Zhang Yi could kill 3 high-level mutants in one go? That was one of the 2 pillars of Neon, plus a member of the Hell Lock. If you were to encounter these 3 people, ask yourself, even if it was one of the 4 spirits, they would have a hard time. Whether they could be defeated was unknown. Chaos, what was his reason? Even Black Tortoise, who had been leisurely playing video games in the command center, couldn't help but look on with interest. "You mean, Chaos killed all 3 of them in one go?" Chapter 10:14, A battle fought by one person. In the photo was the already dead Medusa and Susanoo, as well as the broken famous sword left behind by Amaterasu. The facts were self-evident. All 3 had been killed by Zhang Yi. And there was no suspense, it was an absolute crushing victory. The East Sea region was like someone had cast a freezing spell on it, silent and still, everyone was frozen in place, unable to say a word. Their brains, their common sense, could not comprehend such a being. This was clearly something only Epsilon could do. Zhang Yi, Chaos of the Jiangnan region. Didn't he only have a 9,800 supernatural ability index, and the code name Absolute Defense? Why could a mutant like this kill so many powerful mutants 1-on-3? No one could understand. Li Tianyang was silent for several minutes. This time, the look in his eyes had completely turned to confusion. Even he didn't know how to explain this phenomenon. Black Tortoise glanced at the photo and then lowered his head to continue playing the game. Jiangnan region, will it finally have its own Epsilon? He didn't care about that. It would be better if Zhang Yi could finally obtain the source of God and become Epsilon. Because then, he would be the only Epsilon in the East Sea region. Li Tianyang was silent for 5 whole minutes. It took him 5 minutes to digest the reality. After Zhang Yi arrived on the island, his achievements were simply astounding. The points he obtained alone exceeded the total of everyone else. Even the 4 spirits, of which the East Sea region was most proud, were completely overshadowed by Zhang Yi. He hung his head slowly, his heart filled with complex emotions. If this continued, wouldn't the source of God fall into Zhang Yi's hands in the end? Although this was not that hard to accept, it was better than falling into the hands of the Columbia Navy. However, Li Tianyang could not accept this fact. Because from the very beginning, a personal grudge had developed between him and Zhang Yi. The more outstanding Zhang Yi became, the more despicable his actions had seemed. Zhang Yi's brilliance was a shadow over him, a slap in the face. A fleeting thought even crossed his mind. Even if the source of God was to be left to the Allied forces, Zhang Yi must not get it. Otherwise, given their history, if Zhang Yi became Epsilon, he would definitely come looking for him to settle the score. As soon as this thought occurred, it shocked Li Tianyang. How could he, as a soldier, have such a narrow-minded thought? But malice was like a flood. Once it was unleashed, it was difficult to retract. Jealousy. He began to be jealous of Zhang Yi. He absolutely could not allow this man to continue to become stronger and more brilliant. Li Tianyang turned his head sharply to look at Situ Xian. Minister Situ, I am the commander-in-chief of this operation, right? Minister Situ smiled and nodded. Yes, commander-in-chief of the battlefield. Yes, commander-in-chief of the battlefield, but you have two supreme commanders of the two major battlefields above you. Li Tianyang asked in a stern voice, then why didn't Chaos report to me about the operation, but instead conveyed it to you first? What did he mean by that? Li Tianyang's actions caused everyone at the scene to look on with side glances. Even the officers from the East Sea region were embarrassed and looked away. Li Tianyang's suppression was too obvious. Zhang Yi had made great contributions, but at this time, because of personal grudges, he did not give praise, but instead first pursued the guilt. This made people unable to watch. Situ Xian was not a pushover either. Zhang Yi's brilliant achievements were his greatest source of strength. Cough cough, Minister Li, this is a bit wrong, isn't it? Chaos has achieved such great feats, we should reward him. With a tongue like yours, it's no wonder he doesn't want to report to you. Situ Xian's words were full of barbs, and he was not at all polite to Li Tianyang. Everyone was only cooperating temporarily. Although the Jiangnan region was not as strong as the East Sea region, it was not made of mud either. Li Tianyang's gaze was gloomy, and he pressed the brim of his cap. In any case, unauthorized actions on the battlefield are a major taboo. You immediately have Chaos contact me. Doesn't he like hunting mutants? Good, then let him go and kill the vice-captain of the Lock of Hell, Billy the Kid. In this way, we can ensure that we will obtain the source of God without any problems. Li Tianyang's intentions were clear as day. Billy the Kid's strength was not comparable to that of any other mutant. He was a mutant who was one step away from entering the threshold of Epsilon. Li Tianyang told Zhang Yi to kill him, and no matter the outcome, the East Sea region would ultimately benefit. A fight between two tigers will definitely result in one tiger being injured, or perhaps both tigers being injured. By that time, the four spirits of the East Sea region would be able to reap the benefits, and the source of God would become theirs for the taking. With his arms folded, Situ Xian said indifferently, "This is wrong. Our Jiangnan region has now achieved brilliant results on the battlefield. In contrast, your East Sea region, alas." His sigh made the officers of the East Sea region look at each other, too ashamed to speak. When they arrived, they simply looked down on the Jiangnan region, thinking that they were the absolute main force on the battlefield. They said that all the Jiangnan region had to do was support them. But now, where were their results? The Azure Dragon managed to kill one Jin Shiqing, which was not a bad result. However, the others had yet to achieve the feat of killing a captain. In fact, they could not be blamed. In the thick fog, everyone was cautious and did not dare to act lightly. Zhang Yi was an exception. With his free space shuffle supernatural ability, he could travel between areas at top speed. Moreover, he had made preparations in advance and brought flowers and Lele with him to facilitate the search for enemies. From this perspective, he was the best prepared of all. However, it could not be said that he was necessarily much stronger than people like the Four Spirits and Billy the Kid. He had simply exploited the convenience of his abilities to the extreme. Situ Xian smiled and said to Li, "The mighty East Sea region should also show off your strength. How about it, Billy the Kid, you go kill them?" Li Tianyang was a little red-faced from being contradicted. He was at a loss for words. What the other person said was also correct. Zhang Yi had killed 3 members of the underworld chain. However, the East Sea region had no obvious achievements. In the end, Li Tianyang could only let out a cold snort. It didn't make sense, and his words had weakened by 3 points. What's more, not only did they not make sense, they didn't have enough achievements to back up his arrogance. Li Tianyang coldly looked at the 3-dimensional map. He thought to himself, "I'll let you guys run wild for a while. That guy Chaos, all he knows how to do is hunt mutants." This was a good thing, at least it had cleared up a lot of trouble for our people. Azure Dragon and the others could head to the Misty Valley more smoothly. Once we obtain the Source of God, everything you've done before will pale in comparison. Chapter 10-15, Lost Soul. There were certainly some minor frictions in the command center of the Huashu Kingdom, but overall, except for Li Tianyang, everyone else was filled with joy and excitement. The more senior mutants Zhang Yi killed, the higher the possibility that they would win the battle. However, they could not be too happy just yet. The ultimate goal of their landing on the island was not to kill anyone. They had to obtain the Source of God. A single portion of the Source of God could at least create a mutant of Epsilon rank. To put it bluntly, the value of a mutant of Epsilon rank was equivalent to that of the majority of the people on the island. If the Allied forces obtained it first, they would still be the ultimate losers. Columbia Navy Temporary Command Center. There was a sense of oppression. There was complete silence. The atmosphere in the entire command center was eerily still. The officers watched as Christina was killed. They stood straight, each quietly surveying General Horn in the corner of their eyes, not daring to make a sound. Just from his back, they could feel the general's anger had reached its limit. Another member of the Hell Lock had fallen. This time, unless they get their hands on the Source of God, they will suffer their greatest loss since the end of the world. When they return to the naval base, he will definitely be demoted to the bottom and will never have the chance to advance in the Navy again. Although so far, he has not committed many mistakes that are not related to the war. But when something goes wrong, someone always has to take the blame. As the commander-in-chief of the battlefield, he is hard to absolve from blame. General Horn clenched his fists and slammed them onto the command desk. His eyes were bloodshot, and he clenched his teeth so hard that his gums bled. This can't continue. This guy is more trouble than he looks. We no longer have any advantage on the battlefield. He turned his head and looked at his deputy, Lieutenant Colonel Clutie, with a fierce expression in his eyes. "Send out the Soul Reaper," he said coldly. Everyone present also became cold inside. Karuti swallowed hard and asked with difficulty, "Do we really have to go this far?" Even Cardalus, who had been crossing his arms and watching the show, had a change in his gaze when he heard the name Soul Reaper. He sighed, as if reminiscing about something. General Horn roared, "There is no turning back now. 3 members of the Lock of Hell have already been killed, causing a serious imbalance in our combat strength. Even if we send other mutants to the island, we are just sending food to that bastard called Chaos. We cannot afford to lose this battle. We must win at any cost." General Horn waved his hand. "I am now the highest-ranking officer here, so follow my orders. Go, release the Soul Reaper." The officers looked at each other. They didn't want to see the monster reappear, but there was really no other way. On the control panel, several operators opened the ship's operating diagram. The entire structure of the ship could be seen on the screen. The screen zoomed in until it reached the innermost part of the ship. There, under the layers of iron armor, a coffin-like iron box exists. The operator's hands were shaking, and she looked at General Horn. "General, please enter the command." A control panel appeared in front of General Horn, who who hesitated for a second before quickly entering the release command. A moment later, at the bottom of the ship, there was a sealed room. This room was filled with transparent liquid. They were the most dangerous organic solutions. Ordinary people would quickly turn into ice sculptures if they were exposed to even a trace of them. Thousands of cubic meters of such solutions filled the space. Gurgle, the sound of water flowing came from the room. A hexagonal mark appeared on the floor at the bottom of the room. Then a piece of the floor began to slowly rise. The floor rose higher and higher, revealing what was underneath it. It was a coffin made of an unknown black metal. It was completely black, not reflecting light, as if it would even devour the light as it passed through it. A heavy metal chain dragged it along as it slowly floated to the surface of the solution. The doors to the room opened. Dozens of heavily armed Columbia mutant soldiers, armed to the teeth, pointed their guns at it as if it were the enemy. Even though they knew that the casket in front of them was enough to seal an extremely powerful mutant. But the monster inside the coffin had once cast an immense shadow over them. Anyone who thought of his name would shudder. Ordinarily, not even a few people in the Columbus Ocean Fleet would dare to mention his name. Everyone would just call him you-know-who. He was the nightmare of the entire Columbia Fleet. Escorted by soldiers, the huge black coffin was placed on a launch pad. A commanding-looking mutant came to the control panel and sent a signal of readiness to the command center. Operations began immediately over there, and all of Zhang Yi's personal information was passed on. Soul Reaper, your mission is to kill him. The order was simple and straightforward. He couldn't understand it because it was too complicated. Inside the black coffin, a pale and ugly head suddenly opened its eyes. It was a face that didn't look like a living person's, with a shockingly large head, like a human head being boiled in a pot. His pupils were the size of rice grains, and the electrodes inserted into his head directly transmitted information about the target chaos into his brain. Then, the launch button was pressed. The launch doors of the battleship opened. The black coffin was ejected like a missile, directly toward Star Island. This was a very comical act. Because they didn't even dare to release the person inside and send them to the island. Soul Reaper, the double-edged sword of the Columbia Navy. Strictly speaking, he was a failed experiment in the super soldier program. Among the 1,000 soldiers with supernatural potential who were selected in the beginning, only Cardalus succeeded in the end. Almost all of the rest died. However, Soul Reaper was an exception. He survived, but almost lost his mind, and was left with only the instinct to kill. Most of the time, he was a killing machine that only occasionally remained conscious. So when he appeared, more often than not, the first person he killed was not the enemy, but a member of the Columbia Navy. To put it mildly, the number of Columbia soldiers killed at his hands was much higher than that of the enemy. But the Columbia Navy did not choose to destroy him, but instead kept him around. Because sooner or later, such a pure and dangerous killing machine would come in handy. For example, right now.